Welcome to the Cannabis Equipment News Podcast.
Hi, I'm David Manti, and welcome to a new episode of the Cannabis Equipment News Podcast. We have a special day for you today. Today we have three different guests: Jim Glimko, Teamsters Local 777 President; Christopher Smith, business agent with the Teamsters; and Alex Suarez, a cannabis agent at Ascend Wellness in Chicago. Thank you all very much for joining me today.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Yes. All right. Before we get started, please make sure to like, share, and subscribe to the podcast. You could also help us out a lot by leaving the podcast a positive review on whatever platform you use. If you want to email the podcast, you can reach me at david@cannabisequipmentnews.com with email the podcast in the subject line. You can also subscribe to our daily newsletter. Make sure you get it delivered to your inbox first. Jim, I'm going to start with you because I was going to anyway, not just because you got to get rolling out of here in a little bit, but I wanted to know how the Teamsters and yourself specifically got involved in the cannabis industry.
You know, the Teamsters do everything, and they do a lot of stuff with distribution, with warehousing and transportation and sales of stuff. And so when you look at cannabis, it really covers everything that the Teamsters do. You know, this is a brand new industry. And with this industry, I mean, right now there's, 400,000 jobs in cannabis. Mm-hmm. So it's an industry that the Teamsters cannot ignore. And it's an important industry. And we want to make sure that the people who go into the industry, which a lot of people like cannabis and like to be in the industry because it is cannabis, but we want to make sure that they like it for that reason, but also they like it because it's a good job with good pay, good benefits, and a job you can stay at for a long time.
What was it like, that moment that the Teamsters decided to get involved? Was it pushed by people from in the industry looking for representation, or was it the Teamsters saying, hey, we might be able to help you out?
I think it was both. I mean, people within the Teamsters, saw that, and they wanted the teams, they wanted us to organize and all the locals to organize, but our local jumped into it, with both feet, because we had contacts and we had people that, were really pushing. And then it's really a bottom-up movement with cannabis and with the organizing. We've got so many people calling us because they're like, hey, I got in this industry and I love what I do, but they really don't pay me enough to afford my rent, for my mortgage and everything else, and my car payments. So, and they want to stay in it. And there's a lot of people who want to stay true to the industry and true to what cannabis is all about. And it seems like there are some people in the industry who just want to make money off it, and that's all they want to do. So we're responding to what people are telling us. We got in, and it just, the floodgates are open. People know that the Teamsters are very serious about making sure that we enforce contracts and make sure that people get contracts that they can make a living out of.
I mean, I've definitely seen that the base, the labor in cannabis is passionate about cannabis and wants to be here, to be involved with the industry. Jim, do you see people getting taken advantage of that because, employers know, hey, you want to be here, this is what you're going to make?
Completely. And I think this is how I look at it. There's a lot of younger people in cannabis, and this is kind of like, there's a business model, which I think kind of like seems a little bit like, in my opinion, what Amazon does a little bit. They get younger people in there, work there. They have a strict attendance policy, so that eventually people work there for a while and they'll point out, they'll eventually leave because one of two things: either they can't afford to stay in the industry because they don't make enough money, or with attendance points, they get knocked out. And it seems like that's the churn of the industry. There's a high turnover of an industry where it shouldn't be. And I think that, I mean, to me, yeah, the workers are definitely being taken advantage of. They're being taken advantage of because they want to, be in this industry, and once they're there in the industry, and after a year or two, they realize, well, I'm not making a living at this, and I gotta do something else. Everybody pretty much has a side gig, and we want to make this the main gig and the main thing people are doing, the main thing they're paying their bills with.
So cannabis employees are seen more as a commodity that's replaceable rather than, someone that can be trained up. Do you think that's a miss by people in the industry? Just because we've seen issues that are really struggling with labor now, like the broader manufacturing industry. Shouldn't cannabis operators be focused on, skilling up employees who could take a greater role in the company?
Completely. And the skill set that a lot of the workers have when they come into this industry is incredible. And there's a lot of people with college degrees and other things that they want to get in the ground floor of cannabis. And their goal is to move up and to stay in the industry. And it seems like most of the companies are hiring people from the outside for the management roles and for other positions where, there's really good people if they, look from within, and people who understand what they're doing and understand the culture, of cannabis. I mean, it's not, you can't come from Bed Bath & Beyond and run a cannabis dispensary, but that's kind of what has been happening all over the state of Illinois.
So what is current union membership at for cannabis workers?
So our local probably at this point represents about 500 workers. They're not all under contract. I think we have about 7 under contract right now. And we're close to getting, I think we're currently negotiating with about 10 different locations on their contracts. Mm-hmm. And there's like organizing stuff going on like crazy because, people just, they see what's going on. And it's very difficult when you work at a dispensary and you work on a register and you see the kind of money that they're ringing up. In some cases, they ring up more money in a day than they make in a year, and it's really like, they know, they all have meetings and go over the dollar volume of what the stores are doing and all that. So they see that, so they realize, well, wait a minute. I mean, this is, they can afford to do better. So
one thing that we've seen in other industries that recover is a waning interest in joining unions and a lot of misinformation that's out there about what unions do. Do you run into those similar issues when it comes to, adding people to your roles?
I think as, being a trade unionist, one of our jobs is to educate people on what unions are, what they can do and what they do. So I think with the workforce that we're, targeting with cannabis, which is predominantly younger, younger people, I think, get it more than most people do. And they understand, they see the economics of what's happening where they work at, and they realize that, they're not getting a fair shake. Mm-hmm. So, and I think there is an education on what a union can and can't do and what unions are about. But I think the younger generation is way more progressively, they've got a progressive attitude on life and how they want things to be. So, and they just want their fair share. So I see it that there's a lot of people with this, they believe in social justice, and they feel that they should be part of that social justice too. So I think it's a great time to organize, and I see there's many other movements with Starbucks and with other locations where younger people are getting together organizing. So I think it's this younger generation that's getting it right.
You'd said there's a lot that organization can help you do. What are some of the things you're helping cannabis workers do right now?
So, take a little bit of control of what happens at the workforce and what the rules and stuff that they live under. So we get to negotiate that kind of stuff, and making sure that people, take safety in consideration. And there's big safety issues at dispensaries. When they first became legal, everybody had an armed guard outside the dispensary pretty much. And now they're getting away from that, and people are afraid. They're afraid of for their security, and they're afraid of the environment and what's going on. And there's other issues at stores that regard to that. And there's, they have a back vault in every building with their supplies. And sometimes, there's things that aren't put together the way they should be so that they're safe for the workers to work on. And so the workers get together and stuff like that. And there's a lot of working conditions that the workers have been really pushing on to make sure that they're treated properly and safely, and they have the supplies and the help that they need when they need it.
So what is the process like? A worker has a problem, wants their union to help them fight the problem. What does that process look like?
So with the union, the union is a collective of all the workers, and the business agents, who's the ones who come out, and the union stewards, and someone who's elected to win the group. So together, they all work together to make sure that when there is a problem, it's addressed. So we have a voice at work with a steward being on the location. A steward can bring up to management issues for the whole group. And if they don't get resolved through the steward and management discussions, then they would call someone who's like Chris is a business agent with our local, and I do business aid work too, where we'd come out and have a meeting and sit down with the company and go over the situation. So a lot of times, it's it's a the union provides a vehicle and provides a structure for being able to structurally address issues that people have at work. And the company has to meet with the union when they have meetings and grievances and stuff like that, and to address them. So things do get addressed. And our goal is always when there's a problem to solve it, and try to make it, the best we can. I mean, the crazy things happen at every workplace, and there's situations you always have to deal with. And when you're working with people, and you want to make sure that everyone's treated fairly, equitably, and unbiasedly.
Alex, I see you nodding along quite a bit there. I'd like to start first. What was it that made you want to participate in the cannabis industry?
Aside from just generally enjoying cannabis myself, putting that out there, I think it's one of the newer, if not one of the newest, fastest growing industries that we have in this country right now, just across all states. And I think getting your hands into that and really growing within that industry as it grows also is really important, and just a completely new experience. So you can like make your own rules almost as you grow with the industry and get familiar with everybody as it's in its budding stages.
Mm-hmm. Is it important to you to build up the industry that is a more worker friendly environment?
Absolutely. I think with getting into the industry so early as it's growing in itself, and then unionizing it, and like having the workers be so aware of their labor rights, kind of really solidifies and has a concrete foundation for the rest of the industry as it grows. When you look back to the beginning of how did it start, what was there, like when you're trying to go back to basics, you see that the basics are, labor rights. And that just to me means like a good, sustainable industry that is going to be here for a while.
Alex, I saw you nodding the most when Jim was mentioning ringing up transactions that may be worth more than you're going to make an entire year. Is that something that you've experienced?
Every single day. It's almost laughable. Just one single cashier will ring out, I don't know, close to 30, maybe something like that, 30K in transactions on a really, really busy day. And that is about a yearly wage. And we also are very communicative with our GM. So he definitely tells us how much we're making in revenue, and like how that looks projected next week, how that's going to look compared to last week. So we're very aware of how much money we're making. And so when we get responses like, we don't have the money, that's just not true, because we see it, we handle it. I've handled this money for you. I know where it is.
After having joined the Teamsters, have you seen any change when it comes to having a few more rights in the workplace?
Absolutely. I think unionizing your workplace is one of the more, if not the most important things that you can do for your workplace, because it holds everyone there to a sense of accountability. So now that there's not just the company doing whatever they please because they can. Now there's a set of standards, as Jim said, a protocol that there needs to be followed, and there's someone there now to respond to. You have to check in with the contract. You have to make sure that what you're doing is in line with what the workers wanted in the first place. And I think that having that sense of accountability has changed a lot of things and made sure that we get the work environment that we are feeling the safest in, and probably also the most efficient, so we can actually, do the job.
No, I understand how safety is critical for anyone in any workplace. Do you feel safer now? And what are some of the changes that took place to not only make you feel safer, but perhaps better compensated?
Some of the major changes that came with the contract that we negotiated definitely were the implementation back of tips. So they had taken tips away when this corporation took over this independent location. And that was a huge amount that we were receiving in our paychecks that was taken away. And that was like one of our biggest contentions. Like we kind of do need this back. A lot of people were already used to living on this wage that they were getting. So then getting that back made everyone, that just does instill a sense of safety in you, because now you know that you can afford your apartment, you can afford getting to work, you can afford to eat that day. And that in itself is a tremendous sense of safety. You have a good net to hold you at the end of the day. And as well as just having the company converse with the union a little bit more, and having that communication set up about the security guards, and like knowing that we're heard and our voices are being heard, makes us feel a lot more at home here, and very much in an environment that we can trust.
Why did they take the tips away?
That's actually, I'm not too sure of their reasoning as to why they did that. They didn't really give us any clear indication. To me, it seems like no skin off my back in layman's terms, just because it's not their money that they're going to be compensating out. I feel like they thought it could be better directed towards donations, or better directed toward upping the average cart. When they took them away, that wasn't true. People didn't donate more, people didn't buy more. They just didn't tip us.
Have you received any pushback from management in terms of like any sort of anti-union pushes?
Yes, and in subtle ways, I'll say that. I'll say I work in an almost privileged sense that the management here is on board with the union. And I'll say that with some quotation marks in there, because as much as a management can be on board with us, you know what I mean? Because they still have to push back in some areas. But there was some pushback in sense of like, when they frame things, they say, if it wasn't for the union, or, it's a very much a scapegoat situation. But I think a lot of people here are very much aware of, it's not for the union, it's because of the union that we have certain procedures in place that we have to follow for our safety.
What are some of the things, like specific examples that they're scapegoating on the union?
I would say probably just like procedures and how things are done, certain staffing. I would say probably staffing is like the biggest thing that gets scapegoated onto the union. If it wasn't for the union, we would be able to do this, or you would be able to do blank, or, so on and so forth, because it's not in our quote unquote job description. However, there's like certain clauses in our contract that stipulate that we can, spread the labor however we need to. So statements like that is really just to create anti-union sentiment, when everyone knows the truth of what the situation here is.
Alex, and for Jim as well, Alex, I'll start with you. How do you combat that anti-union sentiment, and how do you talk to new employees and current employees that maybe aren't 100% on the union, but still interested in doing a little bit better for themselves?
Absolutely. I'll start off real quick. Just because when we onboard people, as a union representative here, I definitely step in and talk to everybody while we're going over the contract that they're presented. And I think the first thing I ask is, what do you know about unions? Like, what is your opinion? How are you familiar with unions? And then once I get where they are, if there's myths that is there, I try to dispel that. And aside from that, we just tell them that the union is the collective. Like, it's the workers. We already are a union because we are united. Everything from then on is us agreeing within ourselves what we need, and then putting that on paper. And, having some help from our friends over here to actually solidify that and get that over to corporate. And I feel like explaining it in some sense of just, it is actually us. It's not a random man coming in to tell you what to do. It's us. Really, instills a sense of like, I don't want to say safety again, but I feel like safety is just the word that I keep coming back to, because you see that it is your opinion that is being valued. It's your voice being heard, and it's your needs that are being voiced at the same time. So having that being being heard by the whole collective and then being brought up to the corporate level, when you do that, it kind of helps people to get more on board with that. Jim?
It's kind of funny when we started organizing or started negotiating at the company that Alex works at. It was very like this in the beginning, and it was a long negotiation. But after a while, people got used to each other and they knew what each side wanted. And then, when we had really good, frank discussions, I mean, a lot of the stuff that was talked about, the company didn't just agree to it because the union said to agree to it, because when we talked out issues, we got a better way of doing things for everybody and a way that everyone felt would work out better for everyone. So, and I think both sides were good at listening to each other and to getting things in and some policies and all that makes sense. So that when there is an issue, now there's a structure for addressing it. And that's really a big thing with any labor organization. And there's a really good workforce at the SM by Mocha. I mean, they're really good workers, and really they care a lot. And whenever there's issues, we have an avenue to address them. So, and this tip issue, just went to about the tip issue, which is it's not funny, but it's just a lot of different dispensaries in the industry had this idea that they should kind of be like an Apple store and not have tips and just be like that kind of a place for selling cannabis. And the workers did not feel that way at all. And cannabis is cannabis. It's not a computer. And there was like 3 different companies that we've been negotiating with that we got them to change to allow tips, and their customers really, I mean, a lot of customers want to tip, and customers really tip really well. So they really appreciate the advice, the direction they give them when they're buying something. And so 3 big companies didn't just change it at the unionized stores, they changed it at all their stores. So basically, unions set the standard for the industry, and that's one of the standards that we are pushing, that should be part of what goes on. Because when you go into a dispensary, there's a lot of people that go in for medical needs and also for other needs that they have, but they want advice, and they want people that really know how to give them that good advice. And you'd be amazed when I sit with some of the negotiations with our union members, and they start talking about cannabis and stuff like that. I feel like I'm in a room with a bunch of doctors, because they know so much about it, and there's the different strains, different things they can do, and then when they talk about their the ones that come in with medical conditions and the different things that they to do for them and all that, it's amazing. It's really amazing. So they really like that part of it, and I think they do a great job. And the Teamsters, their goal now is to raise the standards in the whole industry. And with the industry, I think our local, I think, has about 500 workers within the Teamsters and Cannabis, but I think international has over 1,000 at this point. So it is growing, and it is a growing movement. With that, I have to sneak out to another negotiation. So I just wanted to say thanks. Chris is going to stay here.
Yeah. No, Jim, thank you very much for taking time out of your schedule. I really appreciate the insights. And I mean, good luck with that negotiation. Give him hell. Yes. Thank you very much. So, Chris, thank you very much for sticking around and helping us from the Teamsters point of view. One thing I was curious about is, can unions be successful without having an Alex at the location, or do you need a champion at each location to make it successful?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I definitely think, having an Alex is a must. I mean, everybody's going to be their own Alex in their own different way. I think it's definitely the chain of command, that is necessary in order to get not only what's going on, but have your finger on the pulse of the day to day, to ensure fellow coworkers are not, being abused in any way, whether that be through, write-ups or how they're being treated in the way they're talked to, or it could be a various, many different things. But the main point is that the steward allows grievances to be filed directly to us, me as the business agent or Jim. And that grievance, can be settled as easy as a conversation. And that, like Jim had said, is 9 times out of 10 usually how it goes.
So how does that relationship work, Chris? And so is it whenever there's a grievance, Alex reaches out to you, and then you guys sort of work together?
So yeah, I mean that wouldn't be the only reason. So I'll go over to the location, and time to time, during the month and visit. If there is an issue, a termination, something that, say somebody didn't get paid right and she does contact me, that would be another, route. But the relationship aspect is very important for not only transparency, but representation coming back for the issues. I believe that without a business agent, like I did work within the industry for 5 years prior to having this role. I do believe that helped me be able to represent the workers as well as be able to understand the relationship aspect or the language that Jim may be learning now because he's around us. But, I'll be able to understand, from the first conversation, right? So it's extremely important.
Chris, what'd you do in the industry before moving over?
So I started in security way back when, and then I ended up going from that into inventory. I did work for a mom and pop called 7 Point. It was in Oak Park, Illinois. I then, they got bought out by MedMen. So, I ended up transitioning to a new dispensary as corporate takeover happened. And then I ended up working for a dispensary called it was Greenhouse, I'm sorry. That got bought out by Curaleaf. So it was only a 90-day period. Then but they had me, they used me kind of as a temp. So again, the corporate takeover from Cannabis has been very interesting to see coming from a mom and pop. 7 Point was probably one of the best experiences I've had, in the feeling of going to work every day on top of just the job aspect. And then I went from inventory specialist to a, bud tender or cannabis sales consultant. That was by far my favorite role. I worked for the Verilife in Romeoville, owned by PharmaCann. They just ended up ratifying 5 contracts for the stores, one of which I came from this past week. So that was huge. So that was the reason I love that role so much, though, is the customer care. So what a lot of people, why he said that we may sound like doctors, and I appreciate him saying that, but it is that customer relation. It's one thing that as a business agent, I do miss more than anything is being able to have that face-to-face relationship with the customers. And, you hear everything from the rec side, as, what they may need for the day just to relax or get their mind off something, to the medical side where it's a real ailment. And, you'll become almost friends with these people or their family member in a sense because of how often you see them. And you can see the progression usually of their health, which is an awesome experience. And I've seen it myself, many times, with different customers. So that's kind of my background. And then I did get pulled out, by Jim as, they needed a business agent. And so I had to go through a vote through the board and they ended up voting me in. So it's very lucky, good timing. I was on the negotiation committee with Verilife as well, prior to the contract ratification.
Do you feel like you're still helping those people just from a little bit more of a periphery rather than kind of being on the front line?
I wouldn't say that. I mean, yes and no. Like, I think I still am on the front line in a sense, due to the fact that these contracts are their first and they are trying to set a standard, which we are, in which they also need the education being the workforce that I didn't have, prior to this role. I had to, learn, as we unionized and the whole movement and what it meant to be a union, which is exactly what Alex said, is it is the collective, group that is at the workplace. The interesting thing is that, being that I came from the industry, having and through the negotiations, it's a different aspect having somebody that's worked from within, to be able to communicate with the legal team and the top of the union for the needs of the workers, at any point in time. So there's a full transparency on issues. So that's one aspect. Another one would be, I do believe that the workers come to me and look to me for their way of getting that line of communication. So whether it's, because they've been terminated, which I have gotten, individuals reinstated for false, termination where they shouldn't have been terminated, or a worker basically coming to me because, they are union busting and taking away their chairs or, different things that they had, privilege of before they entered status quo, or as they entered status quo. So it's definitely a fight. I don't feel that I'm just looking at it from a different perspective. I guess from looking at it from the union's perspective, I get to have that voice. That I think it's the fact of the money that gets involved, right? So if something doesn't work out, we have enough unfair labor practices, we'll end up having it go to an arbitrator or some type of labor board, right? So that being said, when these end up getting these hearings go through, if there is an award being made, you're talking money that the company has to pay for legal representation every time it gets to that level. Now, maybe 9 times out of 10 it doesn't, but when they do, or they get enough unfair labor practices, if they don't have a contract, it doesn't really look good for them as they start to try to get new licenses. So that's the only other way that I feel from the opposite end of the spectrum, looking from outside, that I get to represent them and kind of make sure that if they're going to hit the workers, that we can hit them back when needed.
Chris, I'd like to ask, I'll ask you first, but Alex, I'd like your point of view on this too. What is it about the younger generation that is all of a sudden drawn towards unionization? Was it just that the previous generation of workers were so successfully union busted that they just became fatigued with it? But it surprised me to see this sort of re-energized base when it comes to the younger worker.
I mean, I think it's the separation in wealth in the country. That's the biggest reason why you're seeing it. We're feeling it the most as we're getting into our, later adult years or mid-adult years. And I think that this is the fight, to stop that. And, the cannabis industry may be the infant of the working class, but they are definitely trying to set the standard for themselves. And I think that the Teamsters, especially in the cannabis industry, are trying to create a long-term career for these workers as they need. And they are saying they need, and they want, rather than just throwaway jobs. I know we previously talked about the young 21-year-old. Now, it's great that 21-year-olds get into the industry, but I feel like the corporate entity wants to keep it that way, where you'll be in this limelight for 2 years, you realize you're not making anything, you'll get moved out, or you have to figure out a way to get moved up, which you have to know somebody at this point to get that. Where the Teamsters are looking to ensure that, whether it's through the progressive discipline, the wage increases, the retirement aspect, that, you can make a career out of this. And that's what our generation and the youth is looking to have. We've had enough throwaway jobs. We need that solid stability to be able to move out of our parents' house, or, get rent, for, pay for our rent, be able to buy our own house, pay for our family, our children.
Alex,
Yeah, definitely.
Oh, go ahead.
Sorry, building on that, I think that the younger generation has faced a lot of turmoil as they are growing into their 20s and late 20s and maybe even early 30s, where like the very first thing you're experiencing as a quote unquote adult, 18-year-old, 21-year-old, is like a huge recession, an incredibly huge recession. And then also some of the craziest elections that we've seen in, I would say, this century, this modern history. The last 2 presidential elections we've had created a lot of contention on both sides, whichever side you tend to fall on, and just being a lot more politically aware, because that is something that's being thrown in our faces all the time because of social media as well. I think that this generation is a little bit more like you said before, that we have our finger on the pulse of what is happening just in general to the country, to the economics, to the political sphere, and then knowing and being aware of what should happen versus what is happening is radicalizing a lot of the young people in their workplace as well, causing them to have like what people call a lack of company loyalty, but what I think is just loyalty to your own rights and knowing what you deserve.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, no, the masking of work ethic and company loyalty to doing what you say when I say it for how much I'm willing to give you. It's they're close together. It's a delicate balance there.
Absolutely. Even just the phrase company loyalty begs the question of why are you showing an entity loyalty? That an entity that will boot you the minute that they need to. So just that phrase in itself like has no resonance within this younger generation, because we are very acutely aware, because we have seen this happen to ourselves and our friends around us, that you will get axed the minute they don't need you. So
right. And just to add, I wanted to add, so one thing that the union brings in to help stop that is the ability to be a no longer an at-will employee. So we will bring in the just cause. So there's a whole step process that the company has to do. We have the right to investigate and have that meeting. And I will say, just to add on to that, one of the things I notice as, I'm 28, so a young man, Sean O'Brien is the new general president of the Teamsters. And I believe that our generation is striving for that leadership, such as the Martin Luther King, or one of the type of leaders that were once that are no longer with us, and not trying to compare to, but he is an outspoken leader of the labor movement, and I do believe that with the militant and the personality, everything that he's bringing to the table, that helps know why you should have the backing for the Teamsters as cannabis workers or any other industry right now. His representation has brought enough, whether it's through Congress or the things just backing cannabis, and he is a CDL still currently, is amazing. I do think that is something that you would never see, and it shows why our industry, not only through the representation that we've had through Local 777, but nationwide, has shown that loyalty to the Teamsters that maybe they haven't shown to their employer.
Alex, one of the things that you touched upon is that workers have seen how disposable they are. And that was one thing that was surprising to me, because I'm a bit older than you guys, but I saw it from my parents' generation where, they put in the 15, the 20, the 30 years, and then were just discarded. And so I find it constantly surprising that generation seems to be the most vocal against unionizing, because there's this myth around how it's basically it could hurt a company, it could hurt the employees, and it hurts the bottom line. And I guess I've been surprised that there wasn't a change in sentiment, even though that entire generation was turned over after dedicating their lives to companies.
I think a big deal of it has to do with fear mongering against the union. So this is not my first job. When I started working, I worked in retail when I was like 16 or something. Just a couple, mall stores, Macy's, Lord & Taylor, nothing crazy. Whenever I would get onboarded, there was always a section of anti-unionization. They would title it that, like no unions. And the way that they would talk about it was as if there was going to be a weird man in the parking lot soliciting you for your information and then trying to take your money once a month. And they really paint it in a very fearful way, to the fact in a personal way, where you are afraid of a person who's wearing a Teamster logo, because you're like, oh God, he's going to come and take my money or my job. And they don't even fully explain why you should be afraid, but that fear is like, don't do it. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And that sticks with a lot of people for a long time, because that's one of our like primordial emotions, one of the very, very instinctual emotions that we have. So if you really hammer that into somebody for 15 plus years, that might just stick.
That's true. The fear of, at the end of the day, not being able to support your family, and how that, now that I'm a father, I know how that can cripple you. Um,
And I think they're jealous too. I think they have this whole and maybe jealous is an extreme way to put it, but they've already passed their point on when they could have started their fight, and because they kind of slept on it, they're you don't waste your time with that. There's no reason. But in reality, it's the only way that we're going to get back what we've lost.
Chris, you mentioned help that you've provided on false terminations. Could you describe a few examples where you were able to help out and maybe get some people reinstated?
Yeah, definitely. So there was a instance that I had a company that was terminating individuals. And let's say you arrived at 8 o'clock. You were scheduled to start at 8:30. The manager likes you, so I made an edit in your time card to show that you were there on time, didn't give you any disciplinary point. Alex gets to work at 8:05. She was supposed to be there at 8. She ends up getting a disciplinary point, and that ends up getting her terminated. But because there was, the same activity where you were 30 minutes late, but you ended up being okay. It was like, go, which that being a disciplinary point given to Alex, okay, is now not fair. So same activity, not fair, same, fair disciplinary procedure given, right? I was able to then show that through statements from the workers. So basically, I would ask the workers, to write a statement on what had happened. Now, I had, 7 different instances within a week that they started terminating people. And they didn't really have a very high point policy. So if they got 4 points, which is through whether they're a minute late to work, they get a cash variance. Inventory, vault is off, and they get a variance for that, which a variance is just something that's off with their numbers. They end up getting a disciplinary point for that. And if you get 4, you're terminated. So I had to basically cipher through these terminations and see, okay, well, you were here at this time. And I had other workers saying they, obviously were there, at the same time, if not later, but weren't given any disciplinary. So showing that there was unfair, equitable treatment, throughout was the way that I got them reinstated. That was one case. Another one is just, basically firing them for, union activity. So that's another thing that sometimes does happen as the campaigns, start off, in which we can get them reinstated. It's a lengthier process, but we have done that, for one of the cases.
Chris, what is it experience like for these workers who are reinstated? Are they welcomed back with open arms, or do they face a hostile environment until they essentially have to leave because they are kind of deemed unwelcome?
So I haven't experienced that one yet. The unwelcome thing. They are open arms. All the workers are happy to see them. The customers are, enthused to see that they have their, whether it's their bud tender back or whether it's, the person that check ID. It does make a huge difference in their day, sometimes it being that said person. So I think it's management is a little bit then intimidated as well. So it's a larger charge, on to the board if you end up giving any disciplinary charge to somebody that was reinstated because they were reinstated. So there's a lot of protections that you have as a reinstated employee that you maybe didn't have prior, because the board will swing heavier down on the company if they do something wrong again.
Okay. Alex, were there any fringe benefits or any other parts of the job that you enjoyed that kind of turned off as a result of a response to unionization?
Not too many parts have turned sour. The only things that I would say that really dampened the experience, honestly, all came from the corporate end, and these were all things that we tried to stop as well with the unionization. It's just the removal of individuality, uniforms, having to act a certain way, having to follow a certain script when you're checking people out. We just did not like that at all. We tried to fight it as long as we could. Obviously, we have to wear uniforms because it is a job. So we were fine, we'll wear your little shirts. But from everything else, we're going to play the music that we play, and we're going to sell the weed how we sell it, because we've been selling weed for longer than you've been a company. before you. So absolutely, like the people, the bud tenders know how to maneuver that. And I think the company at first did give a lot of pushback, but I think in time they understood that at the end of the day, we do know what's best. We are here with our hands in the weed every day. We know how to move it. We know how customers respond.
What did they want you to change about how you sell?
I think Jim touched on this a little bit before, where he called it the Apple Store experience. That's
Okay.
exactly what they were looking for. Just not a personalized experience at all. You go through like a questionnaire moment. There's just not even making eye contact. You're always looking down at a screen. There's very little like passing of information. You're just giving somebody a product and herding them out the door instead of like engaging in a conversation as to why you are buying this. What do you need? Can I help you find something better? Is this not what you need at all? So the experience that they were pushing for is very much just like get them in and get them out. And that's just not how we do it. And that is one of the bigger pushbacks that we gave. We're like, we can't do our job the way you need us to do the job.
Well, that just doesn't make any sense to me because, I mean, just putting a consumer hat on, it's such a nascent or new industry that people have legitimate questions. They have experiences with one thing that they'd like to change with the next. And I just don't see how that necessarily fits a script.
Absolutely. So this is one of the things that they kind of posed to us, and the cognitive dissonance was incredibly real. So on one hand, they want us to give everybody a very full experience and add-ons and talk to them about their product and get their average cart up and, sell more, sell more, sell more. Fantastic. But you also want us to get everybody in and out of this place and have no questions and be time efficient. And those two really don't exist on the same plane. I can either ask this customer thorough questions about their order, or I can get them out the door. I really can't do both. So, and the way that we know how to sell and the way that we know customers respond is having conversations, even if it's just a short, what are you doing today? Because then if I know if you have an indica and you're going to go hang out with a bunch of friends, maybe this isn't for you.
No, I have made that mistake before.
Yeah. Or like, yeah, if you have like a crazy amount of edibles and you're like, I've never done this before. I'm like, ooh, let's teach you how really quick.
Well, I don't want to take up too much of your time, even though I'm very thankful for the time that you guys have given me today. I really appreciate the insight. But before we get out of here, Chris, I just wanted to ask you, where do you see this going forward between the Teamsters and the cannabis industry? And what are some of your expectations as to what could become of the relationship?
So I believe that long term, we will set the standard for not only the dispensary, but the cultivation level throughout the nation. I believe that we are setting that standard right now in the dispensary levels in Illinois. And I think that it's going to become almost a family, if not exactly that, and we are, as the Teamsters, my goal is, at least in this state, representing the workers, to keep the culture alive. And that is the care for the people and one another. And with that, is through the representation that we have now, with my role and Jim's and every other local that gets and Sean O'Brien in the international level. So I think also if the companies wanted to work hand in hand and give their employees a great work environment and take care of their employees, they could, be open to things that they would never have imagined, at the moment. But and just in the sense of the success that they would have long term. So I don't think we are going anywhere. And, we are making our mark, for the rest of the time this industry is around.
Chris, how do you go about, as you get into other parts of the industry, like cultivation, how do you move that agenda forward? Is it just making sure there's a lot of information out there and trying to find the right employees with the right voices at each facility? How do you do that?
Yeah, it's going to be a bottom up process. So being that it starts from the negotiation committee members that, from the internal side, and they're going to be representing the collective. Usually, as business agents are, will be needed, they will be drafted out from within. And as that case, does come, these people are going to be the new spokesperson and representative for that sector of workers, with myself as well, and just educating the masses. And long term, the more that we educate and get the rights that the workers should know already, but because it's the youth movement, because they are learning the most right now, that long term is going to help, seal it, because we're just going to continue to educate as it, moves forward. And it's needed. So I do believe that's how.
Okay. Alex, we have a bunch of listeners and a bunch of people that watch this, all in the cannabis industry. Why should they join a union?
You should join a union no matter what industry you're in, because it is one of the few assurances that we have to make sure the corporation or the company that is in charge doesn't just completely, for lack of better words, to screw everybody over in that place. If you want to keep whatever level of labor you are at, if you deem that it is enough, or if there's still more to be done, you need to unionize. You need to talk to everybody in your vicinity that you're working with. And it always starts with the smallest conversation of just talking to your coworker about, hey, was that normal? You know what I mean? It starts out just like that. The smallest of, how much do you get paid? Little questions, and then it builds. And it is so important because it is one of the few ways to hold companies accountable and responsible for what they do.
Alex, what do you see in your future in this industry? What would you like to do? Where would you like to go? So
I'm honestly kind of living this dream moment at the moment, because I work in cannabis and I'm also working alongside the Teamsters. And both of these industries are something that I've dreamed to be in. So either way I go, I'm going to be incredibly happy. I love cannabis. I love what it does for people, not just because it's fun, but because it is a actual medicine that helps. And I've seen it help people. I've seen people become a completely different person for the better because of it. And I also know that labor rights are one of the few things that we need to secure in this country, that we still have, the real estate to secure. So I think those are just both incredibly important industries that I would be privileged to work alongside in near.
Very good. Chris, before we get out of here, any final thoughts for the Cannabis Equipment News audience?
If you are working in the industry and you no longer want to be an at-will employee, please contact the local Teamster in your area, and we will bring the representation that you need through the progressive discipline, wage increases, retirement benefits, and just the respect as a worker that you need. So please contact us, and thank you for having us on for all this information to be passed along.
I appreciate all of your time. Thank you very much for taking the time with us today. Been very insightful, and hopefully everybody learned a little bit more about joining a union and the positive impact it might have.
Thank you, David.
All right. Well, before we get out of here, please make sure to like, share, and subscribe to the podcast. You could also help us out a lot by leaving the podcast a positive review on whatever platform you use. If you want to email the podcast, you can reach me at david@cannabisequipmentnews.com with email the podcast in the subject line. You could also subscribe to our daily newsletter and make sure you get it delivered to your inbox first. For Jim, Chris, and Alex, I'm David Manti. This is the Cannabis Equipment News Podcast, and we'll see you next week.
Thank you for listening to the Cannabis Equipment News Podcast.